Hello and welcome. This is Arianism Today. My name is Eliseo Rodriguez. And today we are going to tackle just what Arianism is, because I've been speaking against what Trinitarianism is. I've spoken against what Jehovah's Witnesses is. I've spoken against Socinianism, or, Unitarianism as it is a faith. I've spoken against a lot of things, and I have given the what is the correct view video, but I haven't really delved into what Arianism is, because a lot of people want to know, or don't understand Arianism, or don't understand because they were taught incorrectly. And so what my attempt today is to establish and to give what Arianism is to the best of my abilities. Now, I know that Arianism has evolved a little bit after Nicaea. There's a lot of different, trying to change the words of different creeds when Arianism obviously took over for a little while. But what I want to use for the definition of Arianism, and honestly, what I did was I became an Arian because what I saw in the Bible, as far as learning, because I started off as a Trinitarian, for everyone, not that I believed the Trinity, but I was told that that's what was true. I never really accepted it as a Christian, so I guess I might have been Arian in heart the whole time, but I just never could swallow that. And so I guess I attended churches that believed it. Honestly, they didn't teach it. Honestly, they didn't get into the subject very often at all. And so it's like we didn't even have the doctrine of the Trinity, because we never talked about it. We never anything about it. And I think that's one of the reasons why Trinitarianism is kind of scrambling right now, because the churches don't even talk about it. It's not even a foundational thing hardly anymore. And most churches, in my opinion, look like they're Arian, because they talk about things in certain ways, and they never really talk about the Trinity. So sometimes I wonder, are they, Trinitarian if they're not really talking about it? I don't know. Anyways, that's the way I came into church, as far as being told about the Trinity. But I never accepted it. And so I started to look at the Bible and started to write out, essentially, because a friend of mine, I had told him my thoughts on Jesus and God and their roles, and how I just didn't agree with the doctrine of the Trinity because of XYZ verses. And I'd never really talked about that to anybody. And I thought I could confide this information to this person. And they totally, they were the nicest person. They were the best, best friend as far as Christianity and being there. And honestly, when I said those words and showed them in the Bible where I saw that, they turned so mean and vindictive and said, "Don't you dare think about that in that way, and you can't do that," and just went off on me, like really, really sternly, and just turned into a whole different person that I'd never even seen from them. And because of that, I said, no, I'm going to teach this to her, but I'm going to write it down, because it was obvious that I couldn't even get through 3 words out before she'd yell over me to tell me what was wrong with my understanding. And so I said, I got to write it down, because I could not in no way finish a sentence in front of her. So I'm just going to write it all down and give it to her. And because I wrote it down and just researched my book, the Doctrine of the Trinity is Dead, that's where it came from. I was writing down all of this stuff and compiling it for her, and it turns out that it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and the evidence just kept getting deeper and deeper, and I just put it together and said, okay, well, I did officially give it to her, and when it was finished, and actually when it was published, and she kept it for 1 week and gave it back to me and said she didn't read it. So that's the way that goes. Anyways, so when I came to understand what Arianism was, well, what I believed because of what I saw in the scriptures, and I went into the early church fathers that's where I went first to see, because I didn't want anyone to teach me. I didn't want anyone to tell me or try to manipulate me or anything like that. I wanted to learn. I knew what the Bible said, but what did the early church fathers said? Because they have to have Arianism or something along those lines, because if they don't, then it's not true. It's not part of the thing. And honestly, I see Arianism in all of the early church fathers. But as I was doing this, then I started to look at Arius and that whole controversy, and I wanted to see what he thought. I know what I think, and I wasn't going to change because of what Arius thought. Don't really care what Arius thought. I care about what I think and what I see as right. But it turns out that we believe the same, and there is no difference. And so because of that, I had eventually, after a long time of just pondering whether or not I should do it, I came up with the understanding that I need to accept the word Arianism, accept it with all its thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of scholars dumping on it, and take it and say, this is what I believe, and this is where I'm going to be, and this is where you want to identify me as Arianism. And it has nothing to do with following Arius or wanting to be Arius's disciple or anything crazy like that. It's because I believe it's the truth, that it's the original doctrine, and scholars happen to put Arius's name on it. I believe that it's actually older than Arius, and that he was taught it by Lucian and others, and Lucian was taught it by others, and on the way back to the apostles and Jesus. So, let's get into what Arianism is really fast, because I've already used 6 minutes. So, I'm going to use the book Thylia. A lot of people say, well, you can't know what Arius believes, because the only people who can tell you what Arius believed is his enemies. Well, that's not true. The Thylia was preserved by Athanasius, who is obviously a Trinitarian and an evil, mean, conniving, underhanded man. But then it was also preserved by Eusebius. Excuse me. And because he preserved it, and they're identical, and Eusebius, both Eusebius Necromenia and Eusebius of Caesarea were both Arians. So he had one of his own preserve the document. And so because of that, we know that it's accurate, that he wouldn't manipulate the words, and they're both the same. So it's the only thing we have that we can say this is what Arius thought officially. And so this is what we have as our confession of faith in our group on Facebook called Messianic Arian Assemblies International. A long name, but you definitely can't get it mixed up with anybody else. And the confession goes like this. I've added a couple of things because it's our confession, but things that are going to be against Jehovah's Witnesses. But besides that, it's really the same exact thing. And it kind of tells us what exactly Arius believed. So we acknowledge, it says at the beginning, we acknowledge one God, alone unbegotten, alone everlasting, alone without beginning, alone true, alone having immortality, alone wise, alone good, alone sovereign, judge, governor, and provider of all, unalterable and unchangeable, just and good, God of the law and the prophets and the New Testament, who begat an only begotten Son before time and the ages, through whom he made both the ages and all that was made, who begot him not in appearance, but in reality, and that he made him subsist at his own will, unalterable and unchangeable, the perfect creature of God, but not as one of the creatures, offspring, but not as one of the other things begotten, not ever one of the angels, which is what I put in there for Jehovah's Witnesses, nor is he Michael the Archangel, as JWs assume. That's all added in. And then back to the original, nor as Valentinus pronounced that the offspring of the Father was an emanation, nor as Manichaeans taught that the offspring was one in essence portion of the Father, nor as Sabellius, dividing the cause of all, speaks of a Son Father, not as Arianism speaks of one torch from another, or as a lamp dividing into two, nor that he who existed before was later generated or created anew into a son. He was created at the will of God. Before time, talking about Jesus, he was created at the will of God before time and before the ages, and came to life and being from the Father, and the glories which coexist in him are from the Father. For when giving to him the inheritance of all things, the Father did not deprive himself of what he has without beginning in himself, for he is the source of all things. Thus there are three subsisting realities, and God, being the cause of all that happens, is absolutely alone without beginning, but the Son, begotten apart from time by the Father, and created and founded before the ages, was not in existence before his generation, but was begotten apart from time, before all things, and he alone came into existence from the Father. For he is neither eternal nor co-eternal, nor co-unbegotten with the Father, nor does he have his being together with the Father, as some speak of relations, including two unbegotten beings. But God is before all things, as cause of all and beginning of all. Therefore he is the Son. Therefore he thus has a beginning from God, and glories and life, and all things have been given to him. In this way God is beginning, for he is over him, and God and his God and being before him. Okay, so that's a lot of information there, and that's the Thylia, essentially. And you can look that up on one of these old Christian writings to look at. But then we can look at and see what we understand about Jesus from here. The first part is about the Father, that we acknowledge one God, alone unbegotten, alone everlasting or forever, alone without beginning, alone true, alone having immortality, alone wise. So these are things that are very important. Only God the Father is immortal, meaning he can't die. Only, because obviously Jesus did die, so only the Father cannot die. Only the Father is everlasting, lasting forever, never having a time when he didn't exist. Alone the Father is unbegotten, alone wise, because all wisdom comes from the Father. Alone good, alone sovereign. Obviously, when we talk about good, Jesus says, "Why do you call me good?" When there is only one good, and that's the Father. And that's God. That's who he's talking about, the Father. So alone good, alone sovereign, meaning he rules everything. He's in control of everything. Judge, governor, provider of all. He provides everything. Even provided life to Jesus. Unalterable and unchangeable. These are important things because people want to say that he's changed into this. He gave birth to the Son, but he's still part of the Father, and that's changing. He's not. They're saying he gave birth to a son, but it was an eternal begetting, and now he's got this other personality that came out of him, and it's still part of him, and that's changing. It's saying here that he's unalterable and unchangeable, just and good, God of the law and prophets in the New Testament. So he's the God according to the law and the prophets, and then he's the God in the New Testament. And then what did this God do? We know now that God is alone, unbegotten, alone, all of these things by himself, the Father, alone, God. And then it says, who begat an only begotten Son. So he begat an only begotten Son. So he has a son now. He's giving birth to a son here, whom he made both the ages and all that was made. So he's saying that through Jesus, he made the ages. Now that's talking about, ages is talking about time, space, time, universe, kind of like, that's what he created through Jesus, is the space-time continuum type thing, like the whole bundle. So that means that Jesus was born before time was being calculated, okay? But it doesn't mean that he doesn't have a beginning in that time when time's not being counted. He's being, according to us, time and calculations and all of these things, the space-time that we have right now, Jesus was born before that, because through Jesus, even that came into being. So we believe as Arians that obviously that through Jesus, he made even the space-time continuum that we exist in right now, and all that was made. And that God himself begot him not in appearance, not that he was like an apparition or some sort of ghostly image, like these Gnostics are saying that, that matter and all this stuff is bad. We're saying, no, it's not in this crazy, just spiritual vision kind of being made, but in reality. And that he made him to subsist at his own will. In other words, that through the Father willed that the Son, that Yeshua, would be born. That if it was up to the Father's will. If it wasn't up to the Father, if the Father didn't want to have a son, he wouldn't have had one. He would not have existed. And that's what we're saying, that the Father had the power to decide to choose to give birth to the Son, and he did choose to give birth to this Son, and this is what he did. At his own will, at the Father's will, so that Jesus is at the behest or at the will or he has to be grateful for the life that he's been given by the Father. He has to acknowledge that he was given life from the Father, which he does in the Bible. The perfect creature of God. Now, he says this to begin with, the perfect creature of God, but not as one of the creatures. So he's saying he's a perfect product of God, or he's a perfect birth of God, or trying to find proper words in English is hard, but obviously the first product of God, if we could say product or production of God. But not as one of the creatures, offspring. So he's saying he's one of the products that God has made, or things that God has made, but he's not like the other things that God has made. He is offspring. And with that word offspring, you get that he looks like the Father, that he has substance like the Father. He has all of these things, but he's not still connected. He's not connected to the Father in that way. And so what he's saying is that he's offspring, that all those rules that we know about offspring in human terms also works out for Jesus and the Father here, that he's going to look like his Father. He's going to have the same substance as his Father, not the exact same substance. Obviously, when you have a son, obviously this son is not going to be part of your body, but is going to be part of that kind, God kind or human kind. And so he's saying that he's offspring, not as one of the other things begotten. So not to be confused with, as I said before in another talk, that if I told my son to make robots, those robots are not my children, are not connected to me as my son would be, because he's my flesh and my blood. So he's personally my offspring, and the rest of these creations that my son has made for me, that I told him to make, are robots, and there's no comparison. Same thing here. Let me read that again. The perfect creature of God, but not as one of the creatures, offspring, but not as one of the other things begotten. Not ever, and then he goes into talking about Valentinus, and that they had said that the Father was an emanation of the Father, that the offspring was an emanation, like it's coming from the Father. The Maccabeans taught that he was one in essence portion. The Sabellianism of dividing, modalism, that kind of stuff. So we go out of all of that confusion and saying that it's not a lamp divided into two, right? And with all of these qualifications that he's making, not like this person, not like that person, what he's saying essentially is, we're not saying that God is taking part of himself and forming a son and then saying that God has lost part of himself to this Son, and that because it's part of the Father's substance, that he is also part of God, and that's why he needs to be worshipped, and that's why he's coming down, and that's why all of this. That is found when we see in the scripture, I'm sorry, not in the scripture, in this, what Arius says in the Thalia, that for when giving to him, talking about the Son, the inheritance of all things, the Father did not deprive himself of what he has without beginning in himself, for he is the source of all things. So if we examine this, he says, for when giving to him the inheritance of all things, in other words, when God is giving him the sonship, when God is giving birth to him, when God is bringing him into existence as a son, that gives him the right of inheritance now. For when giving him the inheritance of all things, the Father did not deprive himself. He did not deprive himself, or he did not give away something that he cannot access, that he's always had, that he has had without beginning in himself. He's saying that he's always existed with, that he's always had with. He's not giving away any of that when he gives the inheritance to the Son. He always retains the throne. He always retains power. He always retains being God. He's always retaining being the unbegotten. He's always retaining being supreme and over all things, including Jesus. And he's God. He's not being added to. He's not being changed. He's not losing his spot. He's not having to share his spot. He's not, any of those things have not been deprived of him. He alone solely is God. And that's what he's saying here. That when he gave his son birth, when he gave son existence, when the Son came into existence, that at that point the Son had a right of inheritance, being the firstborn and the only born of the Father directly in this way, that these are, when he gave him this, or when he gave him the right of inheritance as a son, he didn't lose any of that. He didn't add to himself another being in God. He didn't deprive himself of the soul, of being the sole God of the universe, the Almighty. He didn't deprive himself of that. He didn't have to share it now with the Son. It's something that he's always had and he's always going to have. And so it's something that we should understand, is what the belief system is of Arianism, that just because he had a son that shares his likeness, his image, is the exact representation of the Father, that does not mean that God has given away anything and that he has to share anything, but that he's given his Son an inheritance and the right to inheritance, but not that he has lost anything. Because obviously we know that when everything is given to Jesus, that he's going to fall under the one who gave him all things. And so that's just something important that we need to keep in mind. It's not that God is taking from himself, like God could be divided or God could be lessened in any way. So, for he is neither eternal, talking about the Son, for he is neither eternal nor co-eternal. So, Arius is saying he's not eternal, he's not always existed, that obviously there is a time when he did not exist, because if he's always existed, he's not a son of God. That's for sure. You're a friend, you're an eternal friend if you've never been born. But if you have been born from the Father, then you didn't exist for a time. And that's the part that Trinitarians don't want to admit. So, for he is neither eternal, nor co-eternal, nor co-unbegotten, which is the same thing, with the Father. Nor does he have his being together with the Father. In other words, he's not sharing the being of the Father. As some speak relations, introducing two unbegotten beings. That's no such thing as two unbegotten beings. And then to even further that and say that there's three unbegotten beings, because the Athanasian Creed says that the Father is unbegotten, the Son is unbegotten, and the Spirit is unbegotten. So, nor does he have his being together with the Father, as some speak of relations, introducing two unbegotten beings. But God is before all things. That's before Jesus as well. And cause of all, and beginning of all. Therefore, he, being the Son, is also he the Father is also existing before the Son. Therefore he thus has his beginning from God, and glories and life and all things have been given over to him. In this way God is his beginning, and he is over him, and his God, and being before him. So in a nutshell, we're hearing what Arius thinks about who Jesus and the Father is. And I know we've taken up a lot of time right now, and so I want to cut this short. But what I want to say about all of this is that when we say that he has and shares that the essence of the Father, or the substance of the Father, it's the same kind of substance, but when we say not exactly the same, we're talking about not being part of the Father still. When I say it's the same substance, meaning it's the same kind of substance, but it's not the same. It's like saying my son's body, it's the same kind of body as mine, but it's not my body. It's the same kind, but it's not my body. So if I say that the same substance, or if I say he has the same body, talking about body in its form, in its fashion, and what it looks like, but it's not the same flesh, because obviously there's other DNA in there from my son. And so that's what we're saying about this, that Jesus has the same substance as the Father, but he's not connected to the Father being, and we're not saying that they're not in agreement or that they're not together on the same page. I'm saying that they're not physically one. And I think that's important, because when the word God is being used for Jesus, it's being used with Jesus because he is of the God kind. He has this divine essence, that substance, that divine relationship with the Father, but he's not the Father. He's not one with the Father. He's not sharing his existence with the Father. He has his own existence, and which is why Jesus can die fully and not have to say that Jesus is still 100% God and still alive on this other God side, because that's not a complete death. But when you put Jesus as his own being, and God the Father as his own being, when Jesus comes and dies, that death is complete and real, 100%. But if you say he's 100% God and his God side didn't die, then that's messing with your salvation doctrine, with your soterology. And so it's very important to be able to say that Jesus died fully. And then one last thing, two last things. I think it's important to note that subordinationism is starting to take over Trinitarianism, and subordinationism says that Jesus is under the Father inside God, and so that God has a hierarchy within it. And I think that this is the beginnings of the breakdown of the doctrine of the Trinity, because Trinitarians who say that God is over the Father, that God is over the Son, and that Jesus is under the Father, and that Jesus is subordinate to the Father, and that Jesus is below the Father in any way, shape, or form, whatever economical, whatever excuse you can use to justify yourself in saying that there is a hierarchy within the Godhead. When you say that, then it's, first of all, not in line with what the Athanasian Creed says. And Athanasius is the guy who fought for the doctrine of the Trinity at the end. Alexander of Alexandria, yes, he started his whatever thing, and had the council, and he was, all of that stuff. But Athanasius, at the end, he's the one who won the doctrine of the Trinity. And that creed that bears his name says that they're all co-equal, that they're all unbegotten, that they're all eternal. It's very interesting, the wording from the person who helped fashion and form what the doctrine of the Trinity is today. And so when you're walking away from that and walking into subordinationism, or allowing subordinationism to be a part of your doctrine, you are no longer a Trinitarian in my book. You have become a semi-Arian. you're drifting into the Arian part of the world, because Arianism, the heart of Arianism is subordinationism. Subordinationism is the heart of Arianism. And so when you start drifting and start allowing yourself to take on these subordinationist views as a Trinitarian, you are drifting into Arianism. And it's only a matter of time before that doctrine, whether yours or later on in the church, it's a trickle-down effect. It's a slippery slope, and that is the first step towards Arianism. And I think it's a good thing that Trinitarians are starting to accept that, because it's showing that what's being explained in the doctrine of the Trinity isn't good enough. So subordinationism, I think, is good, and it's a sign of the breakdown of the doctrine of the Trinity, and that it's moving towards Arianism. And then speaking about the doctrine of the Trinity and Arianism, or Arianism as a whole, it's important for us to understand that Arianism, when you look at the early church fathers and you don't see any doctrine of the Trinity at all, when you don't see the doctrine of the Trinity, but you do see subordinationism, then you are showing that is what Arianism is. That is Arianism. And so when you look in the Bible and you see all of the apostles' writings, and I think it's interesting that when you hear Trinitarians say that it's a deep subject, that Christology and the doctrine of the Trinity is so deep that you have to take it and say it's just too deep to understand. You have to take it by faith, because you can't understand God. And to try to go into explaining it is too deep. It's a mystery, and it's not supposed to be tampered with. You're not supposed to try to explain the unexplainable. Well, I want to say that I think that the Trinitarians have taken the step too far. That when we read the Bible, we read that the Father and the Son are separate. And we never hear that they are one in the same being, one in the same in purpose and plan and all of that. They're in one. Their agreement is sure, but it's not that they are one being. Obviously, it's never explicitly written in the Bible. And I think that what the Arians are trying to do is the Arians are trying not to try to explain the difficult things in the Bible. The difficulty in understanding Jesus and the Father, and how he is, looks like the Father and has the same, who was in the form of God, and all of these things, that Arians wanted to just stick to the scriptures. Arians just wanted to stick to the scriptures. They didn't want to go into theological oral traditions. They didn't want to go into trying to make up stories about how this was possible. They wanted to stay strictly scriptural, and said, no, we're going to stay sola scriptura. We're not going to jump into theorizing or coming up with explanations on how this is happening. And they wanted to take a hands-off approach and say, look, this is a mystery that is too deep that we cannot go into explaining it. We're only going to go as far as saying that we know that Jesus does not exist for the whole time. We know that the Father is unbegotten and the Son is begotten. We know those things. We know that he was made in the form of God, and that he emptied himself. We know that he was God at some point, meaning that he was divine, had the divine, he looked like and had the exact representation of the Father, but that he was not the Father. And I think they wanted to stay on the scriptural side. Arian said, look, I know you want to come up with an explanation on how they are all one and how to explain this whole thing, but some things are too mysterious to explain. And I think that the Trinitarians themselves are trying to explain something that is not given to us in the Bible. And because of that, they are the ones who are in violation of trying to explain a mystery that is ununderstandable. If any of that doctrine of the Trinity is true, if any of that is true, it's nowhere in the Bible, and it's speculation. And so to be on the safe side, the Arians said, look, we're not going to go that far and say we're going to try to explain God as three persons in one and all this other stuff. We're just going to take what the scripture says and we're going to stand on that. We know that you think that there is a possibility that there's some sort of deeper meaning and that there's some sort of deeper hidden mystery out there. And it's very possible that it could be there, but we're not going to go there because it's unscriptural. And I think that we're the ones who are trying to step into this scripturally based place and try to explain the deep things of God that God had not given us and may not even be true. And so because of that, I think that that's what the Arians are. If you want to go with sola scriptura, you want to go with the Christians who are not trying to add to the Bible. Talk about eisegesis. That is eisegesis when you talk about the doctrine of the Trinity. That's all stuff that you're getting out of that's not in the scriptures at all. That's craziness. When they tried to figure out the answer to the Arian problem, they didn't go to the scriptures. Why? They didn't go to the scriptures. They went to baptismal methods of baptism as an explanation. And they didn't go to the scriptures. Why? Because the Arians had the scriptures. The scriptures were theirs and are still ours. And the Trinitarians or the Athanasians or the Alexandrians or whatever you want to call them, they are the ones who are trying to read in and trying to describe something that is undescribable, that is not allowed. You're trying to explain something about God that's just too deep. Not that God and the Son are one, but the mystery of how God produces his Son and whether he is still part of him or not, that's not given to us. And that's not insinuated in the scriptures. You have to take it as though he's a different person. And that's the proper way to read the Bible. But I think that the doctrine of the Trinity is a horrible doctrine that's given to the church, that's reading into something that's just too deep to understand. It's like trying to officially say this is the way Jesus was formed within Mary's womb. To officially say that God had said that this is the right way, and any other way, if you don't believe any other way, you're going to hell. If we say that Jesus was formed inside the womb of Mary this way, this is the way it was done. We figured it out, and this is how it happened. And not give an opening to say that I'm possibly wrong and saying that if you don't accept this, you're going to hell. That is out of bounds. That is not right. You don't add to the scripture. You don't say, okay, well, I know how this happened, so this is the way it's going. This is the way it's happening, and this is the answer. And if you don't like it, you're going to hell. That's what I think is a problem. And so think about it. Arians just wanted to stay according to the scriptures, and Trinitarians wanted to explain something that no one has the answer for. God has not given us and may be false. And so it may be the reason we didn't hear about this is because it's not true. And so if you want to stay safe and you want to stay on the right side of the scriptures, at least, you go with Arianism. And if you want to be theorizing and thinking that you know the intricate workings of God, then you go into this Trinitarianism and risk blaspheming God, adding to God, and raising up Jesus to the level of God where you're not supposed to have. What does the scripture says? You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods in the place where I am. No one. God the Father is in his own place. And if you raise Jesus up and elevate Jesus up to the point of being exactly like the Father, uncreated, unbegotten, all of these things, that is violating that commandment. If you want to stay according to the scriptures, you don't do that. You just take the word as it is. It never says they're one in the same, and so we're not going to go that way. That's what the Arians were trying to do. Hold to the official word of God, and that's it. So that's Arianism in a nutshell. If you got any questions, please just put them in the comments below or send me a message. Visit me on Messianic Arian Assemblies International on Facebook, and we will see you next week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Thanks.